So we're going to move on now to Garth. He comes all the way from Adobe, and he's going to talk to us. And he didn't give me a bio, so that's all he's going to get. On to Garth.
Okay, good morning. There's lots of seats. If you guys need seats, they're still there. You may not see them from up there, but if you're looking, there's plenty of seats. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about design and open source. But before we get into the talk, I want to get to know you a little bit better. So I want you to think of your favorite open source project. And you can tweet. The internet's not great in here. I wasn't getting much happening yesterday. But if you want to, you can use that hashtag, or you can raise your hand and we can have you yell it out to me, because the internet's not working. Anyone have a favorite open source project? What's that? Laravel? Laravel, right, with an L, yes. Okay, anything else? Linux? It's a small project. Well, a couple people have used it. Anything else? Something battery? What? Tesla, right. Tesla open sourced all their patents. Pretty amazing business strategy. You actually have to be good if you've open sourced all your patents. Anything else? Say it louder. Docker? Oculus? Did they open source their hardware? I'm looking out at a sea of nobody talking, and I'm hearing voices here and there. Yeah? EJS? 3JS, right. Yeah, the JS library. Yeah. Brackets? Brackets is open source. It's a good one. It's a really good one. Extra points for oversaid brackets. Anybody else? Node.js, IO.js, whatever you're using now. Interesting dynamic and open source there. I'll take a couple more. Which one? React. React.js, Facebook's project. It's pretty amazing. Yeah. Ionic. Okay, Ionic's a fantastic framework, and it utilizes Cordova, which is an amazing project. Go ahead and tweet if you can. I'm going to show that later. Well, my internet's not working, but I'm going to use it a little bit later in the talk. So use that hashtag. FOSS stands for free and open source software. Free as in freedom, not free as in I didn't pay anything for it, though that usually is the case. So if you have a favorite free or open source project, go ahead and tweet with that hashtag. And while you're at it, go ahead and follow me. Okay, so we just crashed Keynote. Let's try this again, shall we? There we go. Okay, so let me introduce myself really quick before I get into the meat of the talk. My dad was born in South Africa. He grew up in Durban. My mom was born in Johannesburg and raised there. They left the States. I mean, they left South Africa to go to the States. They went to go to university at BYU in Utah. My dad studied business, but he actually taught himself computer programming to get a job so he could pay his way through college. So I'm a second-generation programmer. Since they didn't have any family in the States, they just became nomadic. So after school, they moved kind of all over the place. And then they ended up in Seattle, Washington, well, outside of it, and this is where I was born, and I spent most of my childhood there. And I was, my friend just sent me this, but in 5th grade, when we graduated from elementary school, what is that, primary school? Yeah? Standard 5? When we graduated from elementary school, they gave us 3 questions to answer. And my friend just sent me my answers. I had kind of forgotten about this. The first question was, how would you describe yourself? What do you want to be when you grow up? And what will you remember most about elementary school? And I said that I was weird, artistic, and creative. I wanted to be a computer programmer, and that I would remember the pizza. Forget friends, right? Pizza. This hasn't changed. And here's, my friend sent me the actual picture. So there's my 5th grade picture. What is I, 6? I must have been 11 there. So then after middle school, my family moved to Montana, where I graduated from high school. And that's where I got my first graphic design job at this little print and copy shop. It was terrible work that I did. It was all terrible. But my clients didn't care, so it was great. And then after graduating, I went to university at the same university as my dad. I originally started graphic design because I enjoyed it so much. But then I took a 2-year hiatus and went to Mexico for a couple of years. And then came back and changed my major to physics and mathematics for no good reason. While I was at school, I actually met my wife, and she's from Las Vegas. And she told me when I graduated, or when we both graduated, she informed me that if I didn't want to be a lonely man, that I would live in Las Vegas. So of course, we moved to Las Vegas. And that's where I got my first full-time job as a designer and a developer. And it was at a small real estate agency that was evil. I didn't know any better. It was my first job, so it was great. I was a designer and a developer, and I was taken advantage of. I was being paid very little for what I was doing. But it built character, I guess. I don't know. So then my next job was a small airline in Las Vegas, and it was slightly less evil. It wasn't so much evil, it was they were kind of clueless. But I worked with some great people, so they made it a lot better. My boss was fantastic at blocking all of the crazy politics away from us. And then we moved back to Utah for a small time to work for an agency. They were a little bit evil, just a little bit. Most agencies have to be a little bit evil, right? And I started there as a programmer. I started as actually their lead Flex architect on a project, back when Flex was an important technology. And then they didn't have a UX department, and I was passionate about UX. And so we started a UX department there, and I was the UX director of 2, right? 2 people, I was the director. They really liked titles there. Evil companies often like titles. But we didn't know what we were doing. So we were making up as we were going. We taught ourselves about personas and sitemaps and wireframes and prototyping, all the great things that we've been talking about. I had no idea about, so we were making it up as we went. And it became slightly less evil. And then I got my first job at Adobe while I was working there. And it was a remote job, so I worked for the San Francisco office, but I lived in Utah still at the time. And they hired me originally as a senior experience designer, working on a product called Flex. And my wife, realizing that we could live anywhere, decided that we should move back to Vegas. So, been back and forth a few times. So while I've been at Adobe, I was, like I said, the lead on Flex. And then I was the first designer and the lead on a project called Brackets, which is an open source IDE. It's good. I like it. And then I switched roles to senior computer scientist, and I was the engineer on a project called Topcoat, which has been on pause for a little bit, but we're bringing it back. It is an open source CSS framework that is designed to be highly performant. We've been running performance tests on our CSS, which is a very interesting topic, and if you want to talk about it, we can. But not many people do. In fact, it's fun to plug Bootstrap into our performance tests and see what happens. Let's just say Topcoat does a little bit better. And then lately, I've been working on a team, the PhoneGap team. And throughout my career at Adobe, I've worked on open source projects. Either they are open source themselves, or they have an open source counterpart in the example of PhoneGap. PhoneGap has an open source counterpart called Cordova, which PhoneGap is built on top of. And since I've been on that team, we actually moved again to Idaho. And it was my wife's idea, even though it wasn't Vegas. But we moved mainly because of my daughter. And the reason behind our move is kind of the motivation behind this talk. So, on July 1st of last year, my oldest daughter, Gracie, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And we moved to Idaho in part because my adopted uncle, who lives up there, is an endocrinologist who specializes, or at least is very good with pediatric diabetes. So if you're not familiar with type 1 diabetes, everyone knows somebody who's got type 2 diabetes or knows about type 2 diabetes, right? Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. While type 2 diabetes is part genetic and part lifestyle, oftentimes it's linked with obesity. It's one of those things that our doctors make us scared about. But type 1 diabetes, there's not a real good reason for why it happens. We're not sure the cause. But all of a sudden the body decides that the insulin-creating cells in the pancreas are bad, and they start attacking them and they destroy them. So the body stops producing insulin. Now, insulin's pretty important. Insulin's actually what you need, or what your cells need, to be able to utilize the sugar in the blood. So if you don't have insulin, you just keep eating, and you have all of the sugar in your blood, and the cells can't utilize it at all. And so the body starts to starve, even though there's fuel right there next to the cells. And so as it starves, it looks for an alternate energy source, and it starts burning fat and muscle, which I wouldn't mind, but in a 9-year-old, that's not good. And then part of that process as well, it starts releasing some toxins into the body, and it hits a state called ketoacidosis. And if it's left at this stage, where the blood sugar is very high, you'll actually go into a coma, you'll most likely have some brain damage, and eventually you'll die. Now, people have known about diabetes, and especially type 1 diabetes, ever since ancient Egypt and ancient India. The physicians there, they had interesting ways of diagnosing it. Turns out if you pee and ants go towards the urine, it's because there's a lot of sugar in the urine, and that's how they would diagnose that someone had diabetes. But it wasn't until 1923 that they actually were able to make this protein called insulin. So that whole time before then, people were just diagnosed and they would eventually die from the disease without being able to do much about it. So insulin, though, we now have the ability to give insulin via injections. So when the blood sugar gets high, we give insulin. Sadly, you can't take it as a pill because the digestive system kills it, but we have to give it through injections, and that helps utilize the sugar in the blood, and it brings the blood sugar down. Then we run into the other issue where if you come down too low, you actually no longer have fuel for your cells, for your body, and it can't run anymore. And again, you'll slip into a coma, and eventually you'll die if you can't bring your blood sugar back up. So diabetes is, I didn't understand this when I was a kid. I remember people with diabetes having low blood sugar, but I thought the reason they had diabetes is because their blood sugar was high. I didn't understand what was going on there. And it turns out diabetes isn't just high or low blood sugar, it's both. It causes both. So to test what the blood sugar is, we have to figure out what it is so we know how to treat it. This is my daughter. This is probably about a week after she was diagnosed. She was not a fan of needles. She's still not. She's better. Everyone told us in the hospital that, oh, you'll be fine. In a couple months, it'll be second nature. They don't know how stubborn my daughter is, so no, we're still working on some things. But it's hard to tell there, but I've got a little machine that when you push the button on the end, it quickly sends out a small little needle called a lancet, and it makes a very small hole in the skin. It's so fast that you can't even see it. If you're looking, you can't see the needle come out. But it puts a small hole in the skin, and then you have to squeeze it. It's so small that the blood won't just come out. You have to squeeze it to make the blood come out, and then you put it on a glucometer, which in a few seconds will tell you the blood glucose, which is the same as the blood sugar. So this is great that we have this technology to be able to check her blood sugar whenever we need to know, but there's a problem with it. Okay, so these measurements aren't American measurements, so I apologize. They're actually different in different countries, and I'm sure you're not using the same here if you know anyone with diabetes. But in America, the target is 100, and that's milligrams of glucose per deciliter of blood. So that's the goal. We want to have her at 100. That's the safest place for her to be. Anything above 160 is considered high. When she was initially tested, she was up way over 500. So that's pretty normal for diagnosis. people get pretty high before you start to see symptoms of what's going on. And when you're high, it's not dangerous immediately. It actually takes some time for it to be dangerous. But when you're low, on the other hand, it can be dangerous very, very quickly. So low is anything below 70. The lowest I think my daughter's ever gotten, she got down to a 60-something, maybe a 58. So that's lowish, definitely. You'll start to see signs. You'll start to feel a little bit weird. I have a friend who, when he gets really low, he actually ends up acting drunk. And even after they bring him up, he's still a little bit drunk for a little bit. So they mess with him because they think it's hilarious. You have to have fun with these things, right? So back to that problem of testing her. We would test her 5 times a day. Once when she woke up right before breakfast, another time before lunch, another time before dinner, one more time at bedtime, and then we'd wake up at 2 in the morning to test her again. We wouldn't wake her up. She actually gets to the point where we can do it without her waking up, but it's funny, as soon as you grab her hand, she just starts pulling in on herself. So, oh, the last data point, oh, it is there. So this was that same day that I was showing you where I was holding her. We were still trying to figure things out, so she was a bit high most of the time. But the problem with this data is that we had nothing in between. We had no idea what was going on in between. It could have looked like this. This would be a safe assumption, maybe. But it could have looked like this. It could have been like this. All right? There's so many ways that it could have gone. In fact, this one's really dangerous because if you look at that last data point, if it had been something like this, we would have assumed that she was high because we would have only had 1 point. But it turns out she's going low very quickly, and she could have gotten to danger without us ever knowing. So there's just not enough data. The lack of data is scary. So there is another option to this glucometer. We can use something, or we have one now. It's called a continuous glucose monitor. And it's better. So we have this little strip. It's a glucose sensor. But it actually doesn't go into the blood. It goes into the interstitial fluid. So your skin actually has fluid in it that also you can test for blood sugar. It's not as good as the blood sugar reading because it's about 15 minutes behind. But it's good still. So we inject this into her skin, usually into a fatty part of her arm, the back of her arm. Even when she was pretty low on fat after being diagnosed, she still had some fat back there. You don't want to do it to muscle, that hurts. But a lot of people will do it in their belly, which she's freaked out about, so we haven't done it there too many times. Or they'll do it in their back a little bit. And then on top of that, we put a little transmitter, which sends the data to a receiver. And you can see here we start to get data, a lot more data. And this is every 5 minutes we're able to get this data. So it's also got this little kind of adhesive, like a little Band-Aid that goes around it to help keep it on the skin better. So the Dexcom is great. We have one. That's the name of our continuous glucose monitor. The company makes it. It's called Dexcom. They're fantastic. But it has a problem. We have a range of only 20 feet. So we're sending our kid off to school where they don't have a nurse. They don't have anyone there who's really a trained health caretaker of any kind, especially with diabetes. They don't know what any of these blood sugar things mean. We tried telling them and teaching them, but they don't live with it, so it's not something that they really are familiar with. So for my wife, that means that she could follow Gracie at a 20 feet distance, right, behind her every day to school. But we want our daughter to have some level of independence and to have somewhat of a normal life. So while I was at a conference in Portland last year called OzCon, this was just a little bit after Gracie was diagnosed. This was actually while we were packing up and moving. We moved in 3 weeks, and I went to a conference for a week. My wife was very happy about that. But while I was there, I found out about a project called Night Scout. So on the Dexcom, there's actually a little USB port, and the whole point of that is so that you can plug it into a computer, get your data off of there, and a healthcare professional can say, hey, look at these trends here. Let's adjust some of the numbers, the insulin that she's getting, and we can bring it down, get it closer to that 100 mark that we want to hit. And a developer who was a parent of a type 1 diabetic realized that he could access that data. So his original prototype wasn't using a phone, it was actually using a laptop. And he actually grabbed the data off of the Dexcom, and uploaded it to a server. So the next day when he took his daughter, this was after he built the prototype, the next day he took his daughter to childcare. He took a laptop and plugged it in and said, here, we're just going to leave this over here, kind of keep her within range of this thing. And then at home and at work, he was able to check her blood sugar. And he called and texted and made adjustments with the childcare from a distance. And then the next prototype was actually putting that software onto an Android phone. So the Android phone pretends like it is the Windows machine, and it grabs that data off. A lot of people worry about this. They're worried that we're somehow violating or we're hacking the Dexcom, which we're not. It's just utilizing the exact functionality that's built into it. We haven't altered the Dexcom software at all. And realizing that he could do this, he didn't know what to do with this software. He wanted other people to have it. He could have sold it as a company, but in the US we have the FDA, which is not too happy about people just setting up shop and selling healthcare software. And they have a very hard approval process, and they're very kind of weird about software because they don't understand it. But they still want to regulate it, which is a great position to be in. And so he decided instead of trying to set up a system for everybody else, he would just open source it and give good documentation so other people could utilize it. And he thought maybe some people might, probably more nerd dads like himself. But what happened is they started a Facebook group, and people just started to use it. Now we have a bunch of soccer moms and other people who are setting up Heroku instances with NoJas. They're forking GitHub repos. They don't know what they're doing necessarily. They don't have a fine understanding of everything that they're doing, but they're getting through it. And then the people who do, they're setting up support days where a couple days a month, they'll just have a Saturday and they'll say, hey, log in to Facebook. If you have any problems, let me know and we'll walk you through it all. The FDA doesn't know what to do about this because technically we're not selling any software. We're not providing software. We're providing source code that people can utilize themselves, which is pretty amazing. And it's actually progressed since then. They've made a Pebble app now. So my wife actually has a watch on all the time that she can glance at any minute and check my daughter's glucose. The only downside so far is that when she's in conversations with people, sometimes she'll be checking her watch and they're assuming that she's trying to rush them, when really she's just trying to make sure my daughter's alive. So that's a small price to pay. So this has taught me a huge lesson. The ability that open source has to dramatically change the lives of people. And that anyone can overcome any obstacle to participate in this sort of environment as long as they have a good enough reason. Like I said, these moms and these dads setting up this software is amazing to watch. And they are so excited for any UX work that gets done. We post screenshots of stuff that we're thinking about and playing around with, and they get really excited and they have tons of input. It's an amazing piece of software to be a part of. In fact, I don't have the internet, but I do have, hopefully, some of it cached here. There we go. Okay, so this is Night Scout running on our Heroku app. The data cut out because I ran out of internet, but you can see we got trend lines down here. My wife, knowing that I was going to give this presentation, made sure to put in all these extra things. This is the healthcare information. So fingers crossed that she stays flatline. She's just putting in little notes. Looks like pizza and ice cream kicking in while she's sleeping. Turns out when you have high fatty foods, it takes a while for your body to digest it, so it's hard to get her blood sugar down after that. We'll get it down, and then all of a sudden the body will digest more, and she'll go back up again in the middle of the night without any warning. It also has an alarm, and I can silence it, so it's good. It's been built fairly well. But our family, we send our daughter to school, and we want the teacher to be able to have access to this data easily. We could send her with a watch, but that seems a little bit intrusive to give to a teacher, be like, hey, here's your watch, you better not let our daughter die. So we've been trying to make it a little bit better. So we actually created an iPad app, and we have an iPad mounted on the blackboard, or on the whiteboard of the school. And we've been creating a custom interface around Gracie's needs. And this is great because it's open source software. we can do it whatever we want with it. It's our data, it's our server, we can do whatever we want with it. And we don't need a trend line in the classroom. The teacher needs to know where she is and where she's going, and that's about it. But then we also need Gracie to be able to tell us what she's doing. The Dexcom won't tell us, hey, she just poked her finger and this is what she's at. Or it won't tell us, hey, she just ate some food, expect a high. So we needed to make an interface for Gracie to easily do this. The current interface actually has a way to do it, but we find that Gracie gets annoyed with it because it's this tiny little plus sign, and on the iPad it actually is covered up by the clock. So you have to get right in there. It's hard to hit. And then from there, you have these tiny inputs. So they're great for me at home on my computer. They're terrible for the iPad. So we are designing an experience around what Gracie needs. So that's my motivation for open source now. It's not necessarily yours. That's fine. I'm not expecting a lot of people to jump on our project and make contributions. If you want to, that's great. But if you're not directly connected with the needs of this group, it's not likely you're going to find as much fulfillment in doing it, and you're probably going to take a lot of time to figure out what's going on with this community, because they're very unique in a lot of their opinions. So, if that's not what you do, why would you work on open source? MIT did a study on why people work on open source. They had this exact question. There was a lot of open source developers, and they were trying to figure out why people were doing it. Specifically, the motivations behind what was going on. And they found a lot of good stuff. There's a great paper written on it. But this is my favorite little quote that was pulled from it. It says, "We find that enjoyment-based intrinsic motivation, namely how creative a person feels while working on the project, is the strongest and most pervasive driver. We also find that user need, intellectual stimulation derived from writing code, and improving programming skills are top motivators for project participation." So in essence, they do it because it feels good. And this was not what they assumed. When they were initially starting the study, they actually write this in the write-up, they assumed that people were doing open source projects for external motivators, to get a better job, to get noticed, to have something in their portfolio, and to have power over a project that other people use. They kind of assumed that it was those sorts of reasons. But it wasn't. Daniel Pink actually has a great book called Drive, and he talks about open source software and the motivation behind it. And he brought it down to these three main reasons: that people do it for the challenge, for the opportunity to master skills, and to make a contribution to something meaningful. Now, obviously, that third one's one of the bigger ones for me on the project that I'm working on in my free time right now. But the other two are very important as well. If you think about how many times you wanted to start a new skill, if you wanted to learn a new technology, when React came out, it would be great to just pick it up and start playing with React if you think it's something that would be useful to you. But you oftentimes can't just do that on a project that you're working on at work. If you went to your project manager and you said, "I know this whole thing's written in Angular and it took us like 2 years to build it, but I just want to start over in React because I want to learn that would be fun." They probably wouldn't be too excited about that. But if you're doing stuff on the side and you're doing stuff in open source, do whatever you want. Start whatever skill set that you want. The CIO of Virgin America has this great quote. Has anyone flown Virgin America? No. There you go, one. Okay, so I don't know about Virgin Atlantic, but their whole, I'm sure they're great as well, but the whole system in Virgin America is actually built on open source software, the entertainment system. So if you fly with them, you have a little remote that comes out, right, and you can play with the system, and it has Doom on it because it's Linux-based and Doom is on Linux, so they just released it with Doom. It's a terrible experience, but it's fun to play Doom on a really old Linux version and do it while you're flying. But anyway, he said, software built on pride and love of subject is superior to software built for profit. And we actually see that with the Night Scout project, the continuous glucose monitor project. The Dexcom company saw the need that we had built our software around, saw the need that we were filling, and they decided, hey, maybe we should build some software around that. So they came out with a new version that had Bluetooth that was able to connect to an iPhone only, because they only had the resources to build the iPhone version first. And they built this whole system, and it got approved by the FDA. It just took them like 2 years later to get it done. And after they released it, within a day of the Night Scout developers getting their hands on the hardware, they actually intercepted it and were able to take full advantage of it. So we have a new version that's running on the new software. It took them 2 years to build, and we took advantage of it in 1 day. The new software got released. And it's the pride and love of subject. Another good reason to be a part of open source software is the opportunity for a collision of ideas. You guys have peanut butter cups here, right? Reese's? No? Okay. Well, they're good. Well, Americans think they're good. I don't know. They're terrible for you, so they're probably bad. But it's chocolate-covered peanut butter. And the commercials for a long time were people accidentally bumping into each other, one person holding chocolate, another person holding peanut butter, and they accidentally run into each other, and they're like, hey, you got chocolate on my peanut butter. And then they taste it, and they're like, this is amazing. I doubt that's how it was actually invented, but that's another one huge benefit that we have, is when you work in open source and you're doing it right, you're collaborating with people. And Stephen Johnson has this great book called Where Do Good Ideas Come From? Or Where Good Ideas Come From. And he talks about it's this. A lot of times we assume that it's these eureka moments, right? A lot of designers like to make it seem this way. We were in the shower this morning. I was in the shower this morning. I came up with this brilliant idea. Let's implement it, right? We like to think that we come up with these amazing things when it rarely works that way. What oftentimes is happening is that, and he says it here, that's the real lesson of where good ideas come from. The chance favors the connected mind. The more people that you're interacting with, the more people you're able to have a collision of ideas. For people to tell you that your idea is dumb and make you change it, or to tell you this is awesome, but I would use it in a different way. We need those sort of interactions. They're hard as a designer, because that means you're having to let go a little bit. You're having to ask people what their opinion is. And that doesn't always come back with, you're such an amazing designer. I love everything you've ever done. Right? Oftentimes it's, why is it purple? I don't like purple. And you're like, that's totally not what I'm talking about. But yeah, so we have to do this, though. We have to have these connections. So how do we do it in design? All those things apply to open source software development. How do we do it with design? So back to that question I had at the beginning, what's your favorite open source software? If you think about it, the ones that we mentioned are good. I was surprised nobody mentioned Apache, Nginx, MySQL, PHP, right, the LAMP stack, or MongoDB, or any of the other ones that you like to play around with now. The internet, for the most part, or largely at least, is built on open source software. The web and everything that we are doing is hosted, is provided by, is precompiled by, is compiled by open source software. And even the software that's not open source is heavily influenced by the software that is. So that's awesome. That's fantastic that it's all open source and that we can take advantage of it and we can be a part of it. But the problem is there's not enough designers involved. A lot of developers are making a lot of user experience decisions, not having a user experience background. And they're doing a great job for what they have, but they could probably use some help. And as designers, especially web designers, we should have a significant interest in the future of the web and how it's run. So we need designers in open source. But why aren't there? I mean, why didn't it just happen organically? Why don't we just have, hey, there's software engineers over there. Why aren't there just a ton of designers as well? There are kind of a couple of blockers. There's a few things that are stopping designers. And initially, we just found some of this from anecdotal evidence, but we've recently been doing some research that actually backs up a lot of the things that we were assuming. But here are the main ones that I've distilled it down to. Unreasonable greed. That's the one where I don't want to participate in open source software. I want to work on something that's going to make me millions of dollars in my free time. Because we all have those side projects that are making us millions of dollars, right? Happens all the time. Or I should say rand, right? Anyway, we have this unreasonable greed. We don't want to open source something. We don't want to give away something because someone else is going to take our idea and they're going to make $1 million with it, which doesn't happen as much as we are scared it's going to happen. Pride. We don't like people telling us if our stuff is good or changes that we should be making. We get enough of that at work. We don't need to go home and do open source projects and people to tell us that that's there. Fear of committee. That's a big one. we assume that collaborating in the open is going to mean 50 different people trying to make a decision. Tooling is another problem. We don't have software tools that are built around design workflows for collaborating. There's not a lot of collaboration tools. What do we have? Dropbox? That's the majority of people using? Or something like that. We don't have forking. We don't have merging. We're lucky if we get versioning out of our software or our design workflows. File formats, not nice. Adobe is using mostly a proprietary software file format, and that's not very easy to use or to build tools around. And then lack of desire. That one's justifiable, right? We get home from work after we've been doing design all day. We don't always want to go start designing for free. But short of the tooling and the file formatting, I think all the other ones, there's not actually a good excuse for those. I think we get in our own heads about some of these things. But there is a huge benefit if we can overcome our pride and our fears. So I put together a humble manifesto, because when you're starting an open source project, that's what you do. So you write a manifesto. There's tons of them out there, and they're all copying everybody else. My favorite one is actually GNU's manifesto. It's a short manifesto written by Richard Stallman, and then the rest of the page, if you go look at it, it's here's a rebuttal to all of your stupid questions. It's pretty much what it is. A lot of people read his manifesto and they think that it's never going to work because of X, Y, or Z, and so he's got all these great rebuttals to all of their dumb excuses. So it's really well written. Mine's a little bit humbler than that. It just boils down to a few things. I personally will find opportunities to design in the open. I will share my experiences, both the good and the bad, so that the new designers don't be like, oh, how did that just get made perfectly the first time, right? It's not. There's a lot of terrible stuff that we go through that we don't like talking about. I will find time for meaningful projects, not just ones that my project manager thinks are meaningful. I will participate openly in design discussions. And this isn't getting on Dribble and saying, looks great. Right? That's not a design discussion. Or, I would fix the kerning on that. That's not a design discussion either. You need to be a little bit more in depth than that. I will work with other designers by choice. This isn't something that happens enough. And I will improve my toolbox. And I'll get to that a little bit. This was actually the original manifesto, because in good form it was written on a napkin. This was written right before a presentation that I gave. It was the speaker dinner before a presentation that I gave, and it changed my whole presentation. So I was up all night changing my slides. So that's my manifesto. But how do we actually implement that in the design process, or what can you do right now? What can you start? The first thing I would do is say, share your process. This is something that you can do regardless of what type of project that you're working on or what level of designer you are. For most projects, most clients, and most stakeholders don't mind if you're sharing what you're working on as you go. You can keep a little design journal. That's a fantastic habit to have. Some projects don't allow for that. But most, if not all projects, would allow you to write up a post-mortem after the project's over. So as soon as you finish a project, ask for a few days from your project manager or whoever's in charge of those things to take time to write up how you got to the final product. Share some of the mistakes you made as well as you're going along. As long as you're not making fun of your client, right? Don't get fired from your job. But share your process a little bit. The next step, if you can, share your source files. This one's a little bit harder for some client work that you might be doing. But if you can, it's really easy to do. You just throw it up on a website, throw it on Dropbox in a public folder if you need to, or throw it up anywhere and just say, hey, here's my source files if anyone's interested. It might be that nobody's interested. That happens sometimes. Don't feel bad. But sometimes people take them and do amazing things with them. Cameron Mole is a designer that I followed for a long time. He used to release his PSDs all the time, and I used to love to go through and kind of reverse engineer what he was doing. And he didn't have to take a long time to describe his process to me. Use code as a design tool. Is there anyone in here who is sick of being told as a designer that you need to learn how to code? There you go, there's one. No one else wants to admit that? Happens all the time. You come to a conference, especially development conferences or front-end conferences, and they're like, designers, you need to learn how to code, and they just heap guilt onto you, right? there's no designer out there who's like, I'm never going to learn how to code because I don't see the point. It's usually, I've got a busy life, I don't have time. So I'm just going to pile some more stuff onto that heap of guilt if you have it already. But the idea here is if you can utilize code as a design tool, you get all of the development workflows opened up to you. GitHub becomes your best design friend for collaborating. Which brings us to our next point. You should spend some time collaborating. Grab a friend and say, hey, this weekend I've got this cool idea, we should play around with it, and design something together. Do a little peer designing. We have lots of peer coding as a workflow. Nobody's doing peer designing. What you get is the art director, hovering art director. Have you ever seen that Tumblr blog? Oh, it's hilarious. Go look at the hovering art director, and you'll just get a bunch of art directors, pictures of art directors telling people how to do their design job, just like behind their back, being like, hey, why don't you move that over there? It's a great blog. But we need to do this where we're actually collaborating and having fun together as designers. Oftentimes we're overworked at work. At the agency that I worked at, we had like, I want to say we had 20 developers and we had like 3 designers. And those 3 designers were on every single project. They didn't have enough time to collaborate. They were too busy just keeping up with all the workflow. I don't know why we overload our designers so badly, but we do. So in your free time, if you're doing open source work, or even if it's not open source, just get an open workflow and do something with a friend. It may not make you millions of dollars, and that's fine. Don't think of it that way. Think of it as an opportunity to collaborate, to improve your mastery of your skill, and to take on some interesting challenges. Another one you can do is donate. If you are working with a client and you have 5 different logo versions that you made, and they went with 1, what are you doing with the other 4? Ask them if it would be all right if you could open source them. Obviously, you don't want to open source it with their name, but change the name to something generic and release it. Let other people play around with it or use it if they want to. And use an actual open license. Use the Creative Commons license. You can look, there's a lot of them in there that you can hold on to attribution still so that they have to mention you every time they use it. Or you can make it CC0 and make it completely free, and nobody can start charging for using it. But don't just, I hate the freebies. They're like, here's a freebie, but they don't have a license associated with it. So it makes it hard for enterprises to use it. It makes it hard for me to collaborate with them. They're just kind of throwing it out there, hoping the world will give them fame for it. And then the last one is contribute. Go onto GitHub, and I have an example of where I did this, and hopefully it's still cached without the internet. Let's go over, there we go. So Jade. Jade is a templating language that I love. It's a JavaScript templating language, and it's fantastic. In fact, I think it's better than Haml. But Haml has better branding and better marketing, and I'm like, dude, Jade, you're getting slammed because you just have like Jade, right? It was just terrible logo. So I'm like, let's build you a better logo. So I jumped onto GitHub, and there's no coding skill here. GitHub is also for people who don't know how to code. That's fine. You just jump onto GitHub, and you start a new issue. In fact, I searched, and someone else had already started the issue. Hey, you don't have a logo. We should make a logo. And then nothing happened. So it goes from March 20th, and then I jumped on April 7th. And I started putting together some ideas. And exactly what everyone's worried about happening is exactly what happened next. The first guy said, hey, please no rabbits. So the idea behind some of this, and I realized I didn't do a good job as a designer. I just swooped in and dropped it off, right? That's not what we should be doing. So I came down here and I started describing, hey, here's the reason why I did the rabbit. It's a seal. Jade has to deal with material, but I didn't want everything to be green. I wanted to have some red because jade's often used for making seals in China, and they use red ink for actually using those seals. So although jade is the material, the ink or the mark is red. And so I also said it was the year of the rabbit, so I played around with a rabbit seal. We had some fun messing around with stuff. And I actually made some stickers even before the logo was approved, because that's what designers do. We like making stickers. So then people started having some more rebuttals, and then I'm like, hey, let me show you what other projects are doing and why we suck so bad that we don't have anything good. Because branding matters. And then someone had a problem with some of my overlays and blending modes. I'm like, hey, let me show you some examples of other people using blend modes in their branding. And it worked out. We actually, someone had some problems with some of the smoothing. They wanted things to be smoother. And so I actually made an animated GIF to show the differences between some of the options. I threw it up on Dribble, and then a person actually rebounded my Dribble post and smoothed it out in a different way that actually ended up being the final product, which is here. It was my first rebound that someone else had done off of my work, I think. It was meaningful, so it felt great. So what you can do is, if you have the ability, find a project that doesn't have any branding, go and start a GitHub issue and start the discussion. Maybe eventually you can build their branding for them. Maybe eventually you'll become a part of their core team as a creative director on their core team. We need more of that in open source. Okay, so back to the presentation. I can get my cursor. There we go. So shameless plug. If you're looking for a project to participate in, come check out Topcoat. We've got some design need on there. Or check out PhoneGap. We're working on improving our open design workflow, and we'd love to help you out. Or even better yet, I've started an open source organization with a couple friends. It's called Design Open. We are about to change the name to the Open Design Foundation. We are working on getting our 501c3, our tax exempt status, so that we can take donations and do meaningful things with that money. But right now, we're just having fun. And we've helped a number of people actually create their first pull requests on GitHub, which if you haven't done that, come talk to me, and we will make that happen, and you'll see how awesome it is to have your code go live. I found a problem on the SAS website, and I fixed some of their background files that were janky, and I submitted a pull request, and now I have a contribution that I've made to SAS. And we also have a Slack channel. So is anyone in here using Slack? Yeah, there you go. Slack's awesome. So join our Slack channel. If you go on here, I've got a little form that when you fill it out, it automatically invites you to our channel. And you'll find that if you participate in open source, that you'll make meaningful contributions. You'll have a lot of autonomy with what you're doing. You'll have a lot of control over your work. And you'll find a lot of personal satisfaction. So no, I don't think that designers can open source. I think we need to be open sourcing. I think we should be a part of the open source community. That's my talk. So we've got 7 minutes for questions. I will stay around, so be a part of the panel. But if you have any specific questions, I'd be happy to help out. Yeah? Oh, we don't have a mic. Do we have a mic? Do you want to pass around the mic? I do have 7 minutes, right? Yeah. Oh, over there. Someone raised their hand. Keep your arm up. They're going to bring a mic over.
I wonder if you've looked at the Apple Research Kit project. Because I understand that that's open source, and I know that they've got a diabetes app.
Yes. So the problem with that's a really interesting project. There are some problems with their app. They don't actually allow you to do custom watch faces. So you'd actually have to go into the app to check my daughter's BG, which is kind of pointless, right? I might as well pull out my phone to do that. But you're right, they do have some amazing stuff that they're doing with the health kit, and I'm hoping that that will change in the future. Just like the original iPhone didn't have support for custom apps, I'm hoping in the future we'll be able to make better watch faces. But I've already ordered my Apple Watch, so I'll be playing around with that, seeing how we could use that as well. But the health kit's pretty amazing. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Have I done anything for yeah, so this is my first time in South Africa. Someone just, sorry, to repeat the question so everyone can hear, asked if I have done anything, would you say open source for South Africa? Oh, it's to solve any South African problems. Yeah. Yeah, well, it was interesting. I actually had, I gave a presentation at a development kind of group, and I talked about some of the same things, but from a development perspective, hey, we need to start getting designers in here. And they were pretty bored until I started showing them the diabetes stuff. And they're like, oh, I've got all these solutions for your problem. And then they actually started breaking off. And they're like, I'm actually being a part of this HIV awareness group. And the problem that we have is the kids aren't taking their meds. And if the kids are taking their meds, they're not telling their parents. And we need a way to track some of that stuff. And or for Alzheimer's patients who need to take medication. And we need to be able to track, hey, did you take it or not? We could totally use your portal. And I'm like, yes, that's not something that I planned, but we totally could. Yeah. we'll let him set up. Any other questions, though? We still do have 5 minutes. Yeah?
In terms of version control sort of design software, we took a brief look at Pixel Labs a few years ago.
Yeah.
Because they seem to be the closest to any sort of version control for designers. But the problem was when we sort of joined them, they're in beta, so it's still free. And then when it came to a paid sort of plan, the prices were just astronomical for what we could afford. Have you come across any other sort of specifically like design file version control systems that are coming out?
Yeah, so we actually are using Pixel App on that design project. And it is free. They actually still have open source are free. Yeah, if it's open source. The problem there being not everything is open source. It's still good to work in an open workflow. Even if you're doing your day job, we need to be working in an open workflow more. We'll find better solutions. It's harder work, but we'll find better solutions. I would say to keep watching it. They were just acquired by Dropbox. And they're going to be integrating that stuff into the Dropbox is all they've told us publicly. But there's some great potential there. Though we absolutely love Pixel Apps. We used Layer Vault for a while, but Layer Vault, it was problematic, and it really wasn't solving our problems. As far as other ones, I haven't found a ton of others. A lot of people are using Dropbox in amazing ways. And GitHub actually just added large file support. So they're going to be trying to attract design files as well into their workflows. And their desktop apps are very user-friendly. They're very nice. Anybody else? Okay, guys, I appreciate it. If you have any questions, feel free to come chat with me later. Thanks.